want to welcome Padmasree Warrior to come up, please. Padma. Welcome. Padma, thank you so much for coming here. I know you actually came here and we kind of borrowed you from another event. Padma is here to speak at the Grace Hopper event in a couple of days. We found out about it and said, we got to have you here. So thank you for joining us. And for those of you who don't know Padma, she's had a stellar career as a woman. Growing up in the tech industry is not an easy thing to do, but she's been at very large companies. I got to know her at Motorola when she was there as a CTO. Then we followed her to Cisco, where she again did a brilliant job there. She also sits on the board of companies, a small company, I think the largest market cap company in the world, Microsoft, she's on the board of, just like Deep is on with SoftBank. So we got some amazing people here. And also on Spotify. My kids love Spotify, by the way. So that's her past. So I want to focus on two things. One is the large company experience you had, and then we'll come to your experience at Neo, and now very curious, I think the audience is about Fable as well. So in your past, I mean, just talk to us. I think there are quite a few women in the audience as well. How did you navigate the space with where women didn't have the opportunities as much as the men did? What was your secret to kind of move up the ranks, gain confidence, and build awareness and visibility?
Great. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's my pleasure to be here. Actually, as MR said, I came to keynote at the Grace Hopper conference tomorrow. So hopefully you'll all attend and support. It's, I think, about 6,000 or so women in India attending the Grace Hopper conference. It's their 10th year anniversary. So a little bit of plug for women in tech. So yeah, I've spent, I would say, the first 2 decades of my career in very large corporations. I graduated from IIT Delhi. Went to Cornell and started my career in Motorola. At the time, there were very, very few women in the tech industry, and especially in technical roles in the tech industry. So it was really hard, but at the same time also kind of rewarding. I think you do have a sense of being a pioneer in the industry, an additional responsibility that other women are looking up to you and watching to see how you will navigate your career. So in some sense, that motivates you to do even better. To me, I think my career both at Motorola and Cisco, I would say first and foremost, it's about having deep self-confidence in yourself and your expertise in what you're good at and what you can bring to the table, and not letting anyone minimize that. I think it is something that I've held true in both of my roles and my career progression, both at Motorola and Cisco. The other thing I would say is to make sure you are taking advantage of the fact that there are transitions in the industry, and when there is a transition, being at the forefront of advancing and learning new skills to go into newer areas. I started my career actually in the semiconductor industry. I grew up at Motorola Semiconductors as an engineer and became CTO for Motorola Semiconductor, and then moved to the mobile side of the business. At the time, mobile was just starting. It's sort of like we didn't have smartphones back then. Mobile was still a voice device, but mobile was becoming the prevalent device of communication around the world. And I kind of saw that transition and made a move within the company to move from semiconductors to mobile. And then came the transition to cloud. And I think my friend from Rakuten, who was my colleague at Cisco, actually, it's amazing to see his career progression. At Cisco, we were primarily in the networking space, and we were expanding more into servers and compute. This was at the beginning of virtualization and distributed compute and distributed networking, which was sort of like the beginning of cloud and the transition to cloud. So we made that transition, and I moved into that space at Cisco and eventually became the head of worldwide engineering and head of enterprise at Cisco, eventually ran acquisitions and investments for Cisco. And then I would say the last 3-4 years, I've sort of been an entrepreneur building companies. Very, very different experience.
So what were some of the lessons learned that people can take away as entrepreneurs from the large company environment? What are some words of advice?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think most people start their career, usually if you're an entrepreneur, you start as an entrepreneur and then you either get acquired and go into a big company, then you hate the big company and want to leave, and then start another company, or you love the big company and you stay. And so at Cisco, we were very acquisitive. Actually, my hunger, I guess, to start a company started when I was investing on behalf of Cisco. We were very acquisitive as a company. They still are. When I was running M&A for Cisco, we would acquire roughly like 25 companies a year, roughly 2-3 companies every month, which was a lot, right, for a big company. And I would spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs who are starting these companies, coming into a big company, and I wanted to be like them when I grew up. So I wanted to start a company because people are so passionate about what they're building. I think the big lesson is, when you're an entrepreneur, it's very easy to get defocused, which is, I can speak to that for myself right now, because you see so many opportunities, so many problems you can solve. And you're a young team and you're few people and you feel you're agile and you can go do this, you can go do that. So the tendency would be to just take on too many things, and it's easy to get very defocused. In a bigger company, that sort of like, because you are more process driven, you are restricted to what you can do. So for me, I guess the lesson learned coming from a big company, going to become an entrepreneur, is to make sure the team is super focused on what we have to do. This is the first product we have to deliver. Let's just build it. Let's test it. And then we can do other things, right? So I think that to me is a big difference from being in a big company and a small company.
So a lot of large corporations create this program called intrapreneurship and such. What's your take on doing that within these large companies?
Yeah, I think it's mixed. I think every company tries in a different way. Google kind of calls it Google X and moonshots, and I think they're still evaluating whether that model works or not. At Microsoft, we have similar incubation stuff, and Microsoft Ventures does lots of investments and works with young companies. Spotify has something similar where they are, we are expanding as a company into podcasts for music, and so that team is treated separately. At Cisco, we had something called a spin-in, which is controversial. Sometimes you take entrepreneurs and fund them, and they're sort of like a hostage startup, and when they're successful, we acquire them back, and we would also invest in companies. I think the difference, if you're part of a bigger company driving, is maybe the lack of hunger. I know now as a raw entrepreneur, at some point, you're going to run out of money, and you have to deliver, and then you are reaching out to Rakuten or Deep Nishar and asking them to fund you. So I think that hunger of, the pressure to deliver and make sure you have a product that is unique and differentiated and solves a real problem is a lot, I think, more acute when you're a raw entrepreneur and not inside of a large corporation. I think inside a big company, you can create stuff and they have been successes, but you sort of always have the safety net, right? Like if all else fails, you can always go back to the mothership and get a job in some kind of a role. Whereas if you're a raw startup, it's sort of also your pride. I mean, you started this company because you care about it, you're passionate about it, and you want it to be successful. So I think the motivation to really work hard and build things is a lot higher.
So then you move from Cisco to a startup, a Chinese startup called Neo. Can you talk about how you did that transition and what your experience was at Neo?
Yeah. So I left Cisco at the end of 2015 thinking I want to start my own company. And I was actually looking at transportation as a vertical. I was sort of fascinated by electric vehicles, and I own a Tesla. I still have one. And I was wondering why there were not more EVs around the world. And I also was looking at all the inefficiencies in the transportation model. And I was also looking at education. Those were the two verticals I was thinking I would start something in. And I met the founder of Neo. He's Chinese. His name is William Lee. He's a serial entrepreneur from China. He wanted to start what he called a global startup. It's fascinating to think of a company that starts in multiple continents at the same time. I think we were probably the only company to do this. So it was in some ways an experiment in itself. And today it's a public company. We took the company public in 2018. we build and now ship electric vehicles in China, and we built 2 model SUVs. So I spent 3 years at NIO. I founded the US company. When I went there, it was nothing, and I went from Cisco, where I had 26,000 engineers working for me and a massive multi-billion-dollar R&D budget, to literally nothing. Like, I mean nothing, a shell of a building. And I remember Chuck Robbins, my good friend, who's now the CEO of Cisco, called me after a week and said, "Hey, are you missing Cisco?" And I said, "Yeah, I miss your conference rooms," because we had no air conditioning, we had no conference room. Yeah, it was fascinating. It was super fun, exhausting. In 3 years, we built the company up. We raised a lot of money, took the company public. I was doing super well, and then the US-China trade tension started, and the strategy changed. So I left at the end of 2018. Cross-border startups have fascinating, I think as my friend was talking about from Rakuten, the cultural differences between China, Silicon Valley, and we had a design team in Munich, and a Formula E team in London. So it's like just getting all of the teams to work together when everyone thinks differently, prioritizes stuff differently, is fascinating experience. Someday, I'm sure I'll write a book about, as a leader, it's probably the hardest thing I've done, was to just get all these teams to work together. And I don't know how many of you have experienced doing or working with startups in China. It's an amazing experience. They move so fast. We pride ourselves in Silicon Valley as being hardworking and being workaholic. It's nothing compared to China. And hopefully next time I'll do something with India. Hopefully my next startup, I'll have a stronger presence here, I hope. But yeah, it's fascinating doing something cross-border across different, very cultural dimensions. It was great. Building a car is not easy. That's another lesson I learned. It's super hard. I think people underestimate how difficult it is to build a car, and especially building a autonomous car. There's a lot of AI, there's a lot of automation, but it's doing a mission-critical purpose, right? You don't want the car to sort of blow up or have major issues with batteries or automated driving. So as an engineer, though, I think it's a dream job. If you are an engineer like I am, building an autonomous electric car literally is like every discipline of engineering: mechanical engineering, low voltage, electrical engineering, very high voltage, electrical engineering, operating system, AI, computer vision. It literally touches. It's almost like my whole team was like an engineering school. I learned a lot from my team, so it was super fun.
Oh, that's great. And just talking about cross-border startups, now you have your next startup, and we're all keen to hear. It looks like you've gone from large companies to maybe a little smaller, and now you have your own startup. What got you going to doing Fable?
Yeah, so my new startup is literally brand new. I launched it just before coming to India, maybe a couple of months ago. It's tiny. I've gone, as you say, from 26,000 people to like 700 people to now we have 4 people. So we're bootstrapping it. It's called Fable. So the idea behind Fable, when I left NIO, I was really looking at health, and especially mental health, and the increase around the world on issues like stress and anxiety, depression, social isolation, loneliness, all the way to suicide. These things are rapidly rising, especially amongst younger population, not just in the US, but around the world. And, I started to dig into this research. The main reason I left NIO was actually I started to get really fascinated by why this was happening, what was causing this, and what can we do with technology to address this. And there's very complicated things like mental health that are some of the diseases are very difficult to understand and even difficult to diagnose and cure. And there are simple things that we can do to train our minds to be calmer and more peaceful, right? So there's a whole spectrum. One thing I noticed, and it's true, is there's a lot more emphasis on physical fitness than there is on mental fitness. If you think about in the 70s, there was this whole movement around physical fitness with walk 10,000 steps, and then, all the way to now Peloton, right? Internet connected devices. And similarly on nutrition, there was a whole movement around, eat less sugar, eat less fat, to vegetarianism, to veganism. veganism to now impossible meats. But there isn't anything like that for mental fitness. In many, many cases, actually a stigma. People don't even admit that they're stressed out or anxious. Yet simple things like reading and reading fiction helps us become calmer. And there's a whole bunch of research done by Yale and Liverpool University and Berkeley that talks about how reading fiction trains our brain to remember things more. We become much more active because we are remembering characters, we are remembering storylines. So the idea behind Fable is how do we get everyone to make reading a daily habit and read at least 15 minutes every day. So why don't people read? People don't read because we don't have time. We feel that there's a lot of stuff out there and you don't know what to read, and you only need you to read in a group and share in a group, sort of like a virtual book club almost, but with your real friends, and then have writers self-publish on our platform. So that's what we're all about, and hopefully we'll have our first product by January or so of next year. So we're really heads down now, working super hard and having a lot of fun.
So are you bootstrapping this company? Have you raised any money?
No, bootstrapping it. Focus is really on product. Fundraising, for all its glory, is also very distracting. So I funded the company. We're bootstrapping it. My co-founder has a huge amount of background in product. He was at Slack before, and before that at Pinterest. He originally was at Google and worked on Google Reader. So he's my co-founder. It's the two of us, and we have two other people, and we are working really hard to make this happen. Hopefully, we'll be raising our first round spring of next year.
Great. Once when I was talking with Scott McNeely, the founder of Sun, he said the biggest challenge he had was every day he'd get up in the morning and he'd go to the mirror and slap himself and say, no, 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 and then go to work. That you also alluded is your biggest challenge is focus. So how do you look at focus in a startup versus the big company?
Yeah, it's even in Fable, there's, like I said, 4 or 5 of us now, 4 full-time employees, 1 part-time employee, and everyone has a different passion. Somebody wants to do audiobooks first, somebody wants to focus only on cognitive fitness, as I call it, and some people want to say, no, we should really do kids' books and for parents to read to children, and these are all great, right? We can do all of them, but what do we do first, right? I think that's where you always have arguments with the team. For me, my true North Star is cognitive fitness. That's why I started the company. It's really mental fitness, and how do we become a category leader in that? So I keep telling the team, hey, that's what we're working on. But there's many ways to get there. I think in a startup, if you're an entrepreneur, my advice is always know where your destination is. Where do you want to end up 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Beyond that, it's too long to plan, because so many things are going to change, right? So your true north can't change, and how you get there can change and will change. Anything in a startup, you'll start with a product, you'll get some feedback, you'll adjust, and you'll course correct, and that's all fine. For me as a CEO, my main strength is to really hire amazing people and bring them together and make them be able to work together. That's my superpower, as I call it, just bringing great talent together. I think I totally agree. I think talent, tenacity, and timing are the 3 ingredients that are absolutely necessary to build a company. Some days I wake up thinking, what am I doing? Because even after I left Neo, I had offers from many, many big companies. These are all great jobs and massive companies. And, I said no to a lot of them. Maybe I'll regret that someday, maybe I won't. But for now, I feel this is a job I must do. I think there's always a difference when you're an entrepreneur. If you're working for a big company, it's a job you can do. When you're starting a company, you're starting it because you must. You feel you must do it. It's a compelling motivation that you have, and that's what drives you as someone who's creating a company, building a company. It's really, really hard work. I also invest, and so my advice to entrepreneurs always is look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, are you really ready for this? And if you feel you are, and if you feel you're the only person that is going to drive this, then you must start the company. And that sort of was my case with Fable.
And also, a lot of the entrepreneurs here are based in India, but they sell into the US. How do you look at that scenario, and what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's increasingly becoming the model, right? Markets are fluid now, and there's really no boundaries when you think of markets. I mean, think of me. I actually worked for a Chinese startup in my previous job, and people thought in the beginning I was crazy. Like, why are you doing this? Because that's where the market is. It's the largest car market, largest TV market. So you should go as an entrepreneur where the market is, where the customers are. I think if you're an enterprise company, which has sort of been my background up until this point, selling, I think it's a big difference, especially in the US, in the go-to-market for enterprise versus consumer. If you're a direct-to-consumer company selling into US consumers, you should really care about adoption. How quickly can you get monthly active users, daily active users? How do you sign up many users? Perhaps you're not so focused on profitability. You don't need to be in the beginning. It's just getting lots of customers. In the enterprise space, very different. You work hard to get one customer at a time, right? It takes typically anywhere from 12 to 18 months to get revenue from a single customer, but each deal is a big deal. Like you get a single customer can give you $10 million worth of revenue, but you can't let them down. So you constantly have to be by their side. You have to make lots of customer visits. When I was at Cisco, I was CT's Chief Technology and Strategy Officer, but my job was really selling to customers. I was always in a plane, traveling everywhere, meeting customers. In enterprise, you have to be in front of the customer, understand their pain points, and sell, and then you get to big revenue over time.
Well, Padma, it was fascinating 20 minutes with you. Thank you for joining us. Wish you all the best in your journey, and we hope to have you next year come back and tell us how it's going.
All right. Thank you so much, and good luck to all of you.